Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Ishan. Today we'll be talking about the Met Department's prediction of a less than normal rainfall that has even added more worries about the agricultural situation in the country. There's been a lot of talk, be it in Parliament or out in the streets, about the agrarian crisis that India is facing. There's a lot of talk about farmer bailouts, crop insurance, about MSP, rural wages, El Nino and changing weather patterns, too many layers to the issue. So we decided to understand the basic nature of the problems that are facing agriculture in India in the present scenario and what can be done to address these issues. To help us understand this and analyze this, I'm joined by Gargi Parsai, senior journalist. Also, Dr. Suman Sahai joins us. She is the chairperson of the Gene Campaign. Dr. S.M. Jharwal, a former principal advisor, Ministry of Agriculture, is here with us as well. And live from New Delhi, we have with us Sunil Kumar Sinha, Director, India Ratings and Research. I'll start very quickly, and just to put it in context, Mr. Jharwal, Dr. Jharwal, as far as the agricultural sector is concerned, now 93% is what the Met Department is predicting. That is below normal. How serious is the agrarian crisis, as media reports every day suggest in this country?
No, actually, let me make it very clear that 93% would mean 93% plus minus 10%.
Yeah.
It can be 103% also, it can be 83% also. So if it is really bad, if El Nino is effective, then there is a serious risk if this comes to 83%. See, and we have the experience of past few such years, like 87, 88 or 2009, 10 or 2002-3, where if we take the year 2002-3, the production loss was about 20 million tons. 87-88 was another 10 to 12 million tons. 2009-10 also about 12-13 million tons. So loss in production would create serious problem at the macro level. But when it comes to the farmer level, then of course the income of the individual farmers would also be adversely affected. So this is how we look at this. But we have to really wait and watch whether it is 93 plus
or is it
93 minus.
Dr. Sinha, is it Sumanji, is it a problem of 93% of bad rainfall, or already the problems that are there will get compounded more if tomorrow there is a bad monsoon? I mean, the monsoon last year wasn't that good. We've had unseasonal rains really affecting the rabi crop, and now this prediction.
Absolutely. No, you're seeing increasingly that you can't rely on the monsoon as the deliverer of good harvest. And we know that climate change predictions have been telling us this. South Asia, South India particularly, is going to be very vulnerable. And that is what you're seeing playing out. You're seeing unseasonal rain, you're seeing extreme weather events like we had in this Rabi season, crazy storms, mad rainfall. In fact, farmers in UP who I was talking to, they were saying if it had only rained as much as it is rained now in the Kharif season, our paddy would have been saved. So I think the WMO prediction and the IMD prediction has to be taken very seriously, because a 93% deficit they will not say unless it is definitely shown to be that the likelihood of a deficit monsoon is very high. So you do not anticipate 103, 104% monsoon when the prediction is like this. What do you do with this? The agrarian crisis is acute. It has been exacerbated by the last two and now possibly the third agricultural season. And I think the first thing before you talk of handouts and compensations, etc., is to actually prepare for turbulence in the monsoon, is to prepare for uncertainty in our cropping patterns, and we are regrettably not doing that. So I think the crisis is very fundamental. If you continue to be dependent on agriculture and crop production, then you cannot say that you will deal with it in terms of insurance. Yes, insurance will help, but for the 5th year running, if you have a crop failure, insurance doesn't help either. So to my mind, compensation, insurance, these are very important, but they're secondary. The first and foremost thing that you have to do is shore up your production and productivity systems, which means new seeds, new systems, water conservation, soil health, all these boring things that everybody knows and everybody has been talking about and that don't get noticed when you're thinking in terms of policy. And if this isn't a wake-up call, 3 bad seasons in a row, then I don't know what is.
All right, Gargi, I'll just come to you. I want to go across to Mr. Sinha as well very quickly, because Mr. Sinha, in terms of the overall economic growth, the targets that the government has set are quite enormous, and for that, agriculture has to contribute in a big way. Already, given the way things are going with the Rabi crop and now this prediction of a bad monsoon, do you think India's growth projections could be shaken by this as well?
Well, if one looks at the contribution of agriculture to the overall GDP, then certainly, I mean, the contribution has come down significantly over the years, and if I go by the old estimate, then it had come down to something like about 14%. But the new set of data which CSO has put out in the public domain, according to that, perhaps the agricultural contribution is a little higher, around 18% to the GDP. So if one looks at the contribution, then it is not very significant in terms of simply driving the growth. But its ramification for the economy is far more than the size of agriculture in the overall GDP. And that is why we have seen time and again that a bad agriculture year may not trigger or may not pull down the GDP in that particular year significantly, but its ripple effects are felt over the next maybe a year, year and a half, or till the time you have another good harvest. And the reason, of course, is well known. I need not go into the details. But the issue here, I guess, as one of the panelists was mentioning, is far more fundamental so far agriculture is concerned. In fact, the problem of agriculture is exacerbated by two factors. One, I would call it structural factors, which relates to productivity, production, research and whole lot of other things. And the other is the cyclical, which is what is monsoon and unseasonal rains do. So these, I mean, the problem is more fundamental in nature. That is why seasonal factors, in fact, are exacerbating it far more than what it has been doing in the past. So that's where we stand so far as monsoon and agriculture is concerned.
All right, I'd just like to introduce another guest. We're joined by Mr. M.J. Khan. He's the Chief Editor of Agriculture today. Thank you very much for coming in. I'll just come to you, but Gargi, quickly a word in from you. As far as this entire problem is concerned, we've seen a lot of noise in Parliament being made about the agrarian crisis, about farmer suicides that have been happening. I mean, the new stats that are put out every day by political parties. But just in terms of the approach that the government for now has towards the agriculture sector, how would you rate it? How would you put it?
I think the government is, as the previous government was, this government also seems interested in having farmers pull out of farming and get into manufacturing and services sector. There doesn't seem to be any change in that approach. And so policies have not been really made in a hard and fast way to cater to that kind of a thinking. But subtly it is happening. Farmers used to earlier get a bonus, on their crop, which this government has very categorically said by written orders to state governments that do not give that bonus. I'm not getting into that distorting the market or that raising the consumer prices. We are talking about farmers here. So when talking of farmers, if you are taking away, I mean, if supposing you don't get an increment in your salary for an entire year in the next year, then how would you feel? It's the same thing for farmers. There is inflation. There are so many things that must be taken into consideration. So that kind of a thing. There was a promise of a 50% hike in the MSP as recommended by the Swaminathan Commission. That hasn't come through. And that now the government is saying will be staggered over 5 years. So the increases in the MSP are very minimal. That again I am talking about how it is like when you compare it with the previous year, then in the following year or the present year, the farmers don't get that kind of a MSP. If you're not covering their input costs, these MSPs supposed to cover their input costs and give them a little income. If that is not happening, you can well imagine why the farmers, and 90% of the farmers are indebted. They take loans to sow their crop, and now this kind of a thing has happened, a natural calamity has happened. they would have returned a part of their loan from that crop, but that hasn't come through into most farmers in northern India, as we have seen in this Rabi season. So that again is a very big setback for farmers, and that is why you see a sudden spurt in the suicides of farmers. Now, so that's why I'm saying there is the big issue of areas areas that should be paid to sugarcane farmers running into 20,000 crores. It's a huge amount. There should be a policy for that. There should be something to do that. I mean, for everything, you can't just say that the state governments are supposed to implement, so, you know, the central government doesn't have a role. The central government has to be very proactive in seeing that things get better for farmers. But I'm afraid that doesn't seem to be coming.
All right, so important point you raised over there, is the policy towards agriculture more reactive than proactive? MJ Khan, I'll put that question to you, because we've talked about the IMD's prediction of a below the normal monsoon. Last year was a bad monsoon. The Rabi crop this time around had to face unseasonal rains and a substantial amount of damage. And the only measure that seems to be coming in the offing, we're talking about crop insurance, we're talking about bailouts, we're talking about waivers, but are fundamental issues being addressed? And is this enough to tide the farmers' crisis over?
I think the problem has to be seen in its entirety. Now, one is the short-term measures. Now, the crops have been damaged. Of course, everybody is talking about that immediate relief to be given to the farmers. The other is now the science of climate change and its impact on the agriculture is very, very real. So, therefore, in the long run, we'll have to prepare for the climate resilient agriculture. That is where a very, very deep commitment of the government is required, that how where farmers of the number that may talk about 80 crores or whatever 12 crore farmer families and the crops running into 145 million hectares, how to prepare the agriculture to face the effects of the climate change.
Right.
Now, this is a long done process where a lot of serious commitment of the states as well as the federal government is required. And there is a budget under NICRA, but that is not sufficient. But more important is that farmer sensitization is not there, extension worker sensitization is not there, the policy makers is not there. Now, coming to immediate problem of short-term relief that is to be conveyed. Now, of course, everybody seems to be talking about in terms of more effective crop insurance scheme. We are not against that; it must be there. But what is important is that there is a fight going on. There is a difference in determining how much crop has been damaged.
Right.
Now, today the technology is available that satellite system should be put in place to exactly determine the extent of the damage, and the farmers, individual farmers' damage should be taken into account.
All right, so you're saying technology can perhaps help in identifying the needy who need help due to the unseasonal rains that have happened. But that aside, Dr. Sahai, if we just talk about the fact that as far as the agrarian crisis goes, as Gargi pointed out, it's a very reactive approach that we seem to be having. Now, these problems will compound even to a bigger problem for next year if we're saying bad monsoon this year. So how does one address that, and is enough being done? Is this a priority for the government?
No, it's not. As Gargi quite rightly said, it's not been a priority for this government, it wasn't a priority for the last government. Has enough been done? No, nowhere near enough has been done. And I don't see any signs that there are any plans to do anything anywhere near enough. The misunderstanding about agriculture, its role in the GDP, has to be seen in a very clear perspective, and that is, you have, whether it's 14% or 18%, you have a population that is roughly 65 to 70% of India is able only to contribute 14%. That there's something seriously wrong there. There's something seriously wrong with an agriculture where such a large number of people contribute only 14 to 18%.
Right.
Which means your agriculture system is unsupported, your farmers are unsupported, it's performing nowhere near where it should. Secondly, the understanding that growth will not be affected. Farmers are also consumers.
Right.
All your FMCGs and all the goods that are going to rural areas, motorcycles and televisions and all of this consumer stuff, if the farmer does not make money, he or she is not going to buy, so your growth will be affected.
Yes.
It's unrealistic to imagine that it won't. Now, but I do want to emphasize on one thing, and that is it is possible to do something. It's not as though we are caught in this terrible bind and we can't do anything. This country did create a series of missions under the National Action Plan on Climate Change.
Right.
Nothing is happening on that. And the answer that the scientific community and the government and its policy makers will have to give the country is why this is not happening. You cannot jeopardize the livelihoods of 70% of your population because you have some dream about services and manufacturing driven growth. And I would like to emphasize that the contingency planning that we have been talking about forever, not one single thing is in place. So if the Kharif fails again, do you have another crop that you can recommend to the farmer? Do you have seeds of that crop? No, you don't.
All right, so this could be a larger crisis. I mean, this is almost impending doom as far as food production or even supporting a percentage of the population that is more than 50%.
As far as the farming community is concerned, they are facing doom. They are killing themselves.
All right, and I mean, that's more than ever. Dr. Jharwal, you've worked closely with the government. As far as government's planning for such things go, one can say that one season went bad, 2 seasons went bad. When the 3rd season looming large, going bad is concerned, then there's a serious problem. Is there enough proactivity on the government, and what more can the government do?
I think we have to have a balanced approach on this. And as we have heard, that the dependence on agriculture is to the extent of 60 to 70% of our total population. So one, that this, how do we, reduce this dependence on agriculture? And the answer is that we have to really try and make efforts to shift the extra labor force to other non-farm activities. And that is one of the thrust areas of the last.
But has that created a problem that we are focusing on getting the farmers out of agriculture and not being enough emphasis on agriculture?
So it has to be two-pronged strategy.
Okay.
See, we can't really continue saying that all these fellows would need to be provided the adequate income. Only through agriculture. So non-farm employment is a must. And for that we have to have appropriate plans and strategy. But the other question, I think I completely share their concern, and I have been telling this, that even if you assume or take accept this 14% share of agri in the GDP and put against this the kind of public sector outlays being provided.
Right.
It's only about 4 to 5% of the total public sector outlay for agriculture against 14% contribution. And the gross capital formation, again the share is about 8%.
Right.
So 14% versus 8%. So clearly, I think the kind of treatment which the agriculture should have been receiving is not there. And therefore, apart from making efforts to shift the extra labor force from agriculture to non-agriculture, I think we have to provide more funds to the agriculture so that many of the schemes which are not being implemented very effectively because of this problem, I think can be taken care of.
All right, Gargi, coming back to you, you mentioned the fact about the fact that the steps that the government has taken or has not taken and should be taken. But from here, we just have the last 5 minutes in this discussion. So where do we go from here? Because it's a problem that the country is facing. Inflation would go up, rural wages are going down, and I mean, the worst situation is already there. Farmers are committing suicide. So how does one get out of this? Do you think that there needs to be perhaps a cohesive political thinking? Also, very quick point about the land acquisition bill. Has that hijacked the entire idea about this unseasonal rain and the damage that it has caused? Is that become a point that the farmers can say that maybe because of that, maybe because of these reasons, the idea of the farmer suffering is attributed to something else other than the real core issues?
I think number one, the government has not had time to address itself to the farmers' problem after it took over. It came up with this land bill, and it has been so preoccupied with the land bill. And to tell you frankly, the land bill in its present form it's not even passed by Parliament yet, and it has not been implemented. So that is really not the immediate issue, so to say. The immediate issue, of course, for the farmers was the crop damage. There was some loss in production in the Kharif of last year, and as you just pointed out, that because of the monsoon prediction, we might look at a slightly, it depends on which way the monsoon progresses, what is going to be the spread of rain. There are so many things to be seen when the monsoon comes. So we can't just say because the prediction is so and so, so there will necessarily be a crop failure or a loss in production.
But do you see a contingency plan in place?
Sorry?
Do you see a contingency plan in place in case that happens?
No. There is a contingency plan in place, and that comes, you know, I mean, there are certain periods for which the government waits when the sowing can be done, but sometimes it becomes too late because the farmer has either sown, lost that crop, taken a loan for that crop, lost that crop, and has to again take a loan, but he won't be loan worthy because his crop has already failed. And in Kharif, in Rabi again, a lot of farmers have lost their crop and they will not be loan worthy. So when we hear of government saying in parliament that we have raised the credit to 8 lakh crores, I mean, what sense does it make? You want that money back from farmers, and the farmers are really not, farming is no more that viable for them to be able to return that kind of a money to the government, or even to for them, for their own survival. Right. Many of the farmers are now getting to be dependent on Narega. And as Dr. Sahai just now pointed out, the purchasing power is going down in villages. Now those are all aspects that you have to look. And if you remember, in the last 5 years of the UPA government, it was being said that 4% growth rate is required in the farming sector for the economy to really grow very well. They have to work towards that. But coming back to about the farmers' suicide, farmers' suicide has been happening for the last over 1 decade. It's not a new phenomena. Why are they committing suicides? Because they are unable to repay, and they are a very, very proud community. You know, a farmer cannot face the owner, the loan giver, you know, and that's why they commit suicide. So I would think that even one suicide of a single farmer in a country like India, where farming is so important, is a symptom of something very, very wrong in our policy.
Absolutely. That I mean, this coming on a day when a farmer killed himself at Arvind Kejriwal's rally.
Yes, and that really needs to be addressed. But I would say this government has not really addressed itself to the farmers' issue after coming to power. It needs to do that.
Just to say that it's not just a policy failure, it's a badge of shame for this country if one single farmer is forced to.
And I think we as a country need to take this on a collective conscience.
Let me also add to this. The current problem which has been created because of unseasonal rains, in fact, it has cut the interest of farmers in both ways. One, that the crop has been damaged. Two, when, you know, whatever has remained on the ground, when he takes to the mandi or market, the trader there says, no, the quality is bad. So in this kind of situation, he is not able to realize a fair price.
Right. So it's not about just a percentage loss of 20%.
Government has made some concessions on accepting
So I think this is a very serious problem at the ground level.
Indeed a serious
problem. It's not possible. The farmer will not be able to sell all of its crop, you know, all of its harvest. I mean.
All right, final word to MJ Khan. We've absolutely run out of time. I just have about 30 seconds to a minute. So but my final question to you is, you've talked about the long-term measures, you've spoken about the short-term measures also, but in terms of an overall national approach, do we need more, and what should be done more in the immediate as far as that is concerned?
I think there is a need for more budgetary support to agriculture, because what happens is that when there is a crisis, we have to admit that we have all these years the ad hoc approach. Now the alternate crops or the replacement crops, now the seed is not available. People are talking about that some pulses crops can be taken up, but the seed availability and its delivery system is very, very poor. Technology has to be promoted, the role of institutions has to be promoted, and more importantly, the animal husbandry has to be promoted, horticulture has to be promoted, because there are lesser risks and more kind of durability in terms of animal husbandry's regular income that farmers get. So there are lesser risks involved in that. Crop insurance system has to be strengthened and made it more effective what it is now.
All right, on that note, we'll absolutely run out of time and we'll have to wrap it up. This is, of course, an issue that cannot be just discussed in half an hour. We hope that you sitting at home do understand this, do read about it, do take a stand on this, because as far as the agriculturists of this country are concerned, they're the backbone of this country. 70% of the population is dependent on agriculture, and they're just contributing 14% to the economy. So there's the disparity right evident over there. I'd like to thank all my panelists for coming in and sharing your points of view. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much all for coming in. On that note, we'll wrap up, but the big picture will be back tomorrow with another issue. Do stay tuned.